I now ask the Minister to make his opening statement, please.
Thank you very much, Cahill, and thanks, members, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you today to discuss this issue. So, listen, an important pillar of government policy is to ensure that the horse and greyhound racing industries achieve their maximum potential, and in doing so to contribute to economic and social development in a very wide geographic distribution around the country. The horse and greyhound racing industries make a valuable contribution to our economy. It is estimated that the thoroughbred industry has an annual economic impact of €1.84 billion, with direct and indirect employment of 29,000 people, and the greyhound sector provides an estimated 10,000 people with economic benefit. The thoroughbred industry in particular brings a high level of international investment also into Ireland. Government funding, in addition to supporting these key industries, presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment, leading to a flow of income right through the economy, thereby providing widespread benefits to our society. The Irish equine breeding and racing industry is extremely competitive at international level. We are the third biggest producer of thoroughbred foals in the world, and estimates place Ireland only behind the United States as the biggest seller of bloodstock by public auction globally. Successive governments have acknowledged the importance of these industries and have supported them through legislation and through policy initiatives. The support provided by public funds through investment in the industries has enabled Ireland to develop a world-class reputation for excellence in horse racing, in greyhound racing and in breeding. Thanks to the hard work and the exceptional support of Irish people for the vaccination programme, the Government have been in a position to gradually reopen society over the last period of time, and since October 2021, following the easing of COVID-19 restrictions and in line with reframing the challenge of continuing recovery and reconnecting strategy, full attendances have once again been allowed at outdoor events, both racing and greyhound, or both greyhound and thoroughbred racing. The situation has been kept under review, obviously, as the winter months continue. The Horse and Greyhound Fund, racing industries receive, or the racing industry receive financial support from the fund through the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund under Section 12 of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act of 2001. And my department makes payments from the fund to Horse Racing Ireland, HRI, and to Rasia Con Éireann, or RCE. In the period 2001 to date, a total of €1.46 billion has been paid from the fund to the horse and greyhound racing industries in accordance with the provisions of the Act. The cumulative upper limits on payments from the fund provided for under the relevant regulations has been reached. Exchequer support provided from the fund is crucial to the survival and continued development of both industries. In order to give effect to the provisions of Budget 2022, this cumulative upper limit must be increased by regulation. The estimates for my department passed by both houses as part of Budget 2022 include an allocation of €80 million for the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund, which will be distributed in accordance with Section 12(6) of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Act 2001, and therefore with 80% of the funding going to Horse Racing Ireland and 20% of it going to Rasia Con Éireann. In order to allow my department to provide for these fundings, the monies allocated, it is necessary to comply with the technical requirement under Section 12(3) of the Act to increase the cumulative limit on the amount payable from the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund by 88 million to some 1.54 billion. This is achieved by way of regulations which I have submitted to the committee today. The aggregate limit on the Horse and Greyhound Fund has been increased in this manner in 2004 and in 2009 to 2021 inclusive. With regard to the horse racing industry, the 2017 Deloitte report into the economic impact of Irish breeding and racing, commissioned by HRI, indicates that the total direct and stimulated expenditure of the Irish breeding and racing industry is estimated at was estimated at €1.84 billion in 2016. In addition, it is estimated that there are 15,200 jobs at the core of racing and also breeding and or indeed directly related industries. Horse racing generates a very significant return to the rural economy in Ireland in particular, and also a very positive international profile for the country. Of course, behind all facts and figures are the thousands of men and women who directly and indirectly make Irish racing and breeding industry what it is today. While the COVID pandemic has had a major impact at all levels of the industry, particularly in the area of racecourses and attendances, the metrics of horses in training, owners, runners, fixtures and race numbers have all shown growth this year over the corresponding pre-pandemic figures for 2019. Figures published by HRI for the first 6 months of 2021 show horses in training numbers, which is a key driver of rural employment in the industry, are up 24% on the last comparable figures from 2019, with ownership also up by almost 24% and new owners registered showing a 30% increase on the 2019 figures, so a very significant increase across the board and across those key metrics. Turnover in 2021 is estimated to reach €154.7 million by the end of the year, which would be an increase on €48 million in 2020, but would be down €10.5 million on 2019 levels. HRI does continue to engage with all racecourses to crystallise the losses incurred due to COVID-19. As proven in 2021 to date, Irish owners, trainers, jockeys and horses are setting standards globally, and their stellar achievements and enduring influence underscore Ireland's international prominence. The Irish equine and breeding industry is extremely competitive at the global level, despite other major racing nations having much larger populations and economies. The importance of a strong welfare and integrity foundation to this highly successful industry is crucial, and this is well recognised throughout the industry. My department and I will continue to work with HRI, the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board, the IRHRB and other relevant stakeholders to ensure the highest of standards of integrity and welfare are maintained. In that regard, I am in receipt of this committee's report on integrity in horse racing, which you issued earlier this month. This followed a series of meetings with this forum involving officials from my own department, HRI, the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board, and the Irish Racehorse Trainers Association in the summer. My officials are examining the report, and they and I will fully consider its findings clearly. It is of note that government funding, in addition to supporting this key industry, also presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for its investment, leading to a flow of income right throughout the economy. Support for certain strategic industries is important for future economic growth and can provide widespread benefits for our society as well as our economy. The EU-UK Brexit Trade and Cooperation Agreement reached in December last year, which included the Northern Ireland Protocol, was a welcome development for the sector, but it should be noted, however, the challenges remain in relation to the movement of horses between Ireland and Britain and between Ireland and mainland Europe for those animals transiting via the UK land bridge. The global nature of major breeding operations illustrates that while Ireland arguably now holds a leadership position within Europe, our preeminence is not and is never guaranteed. To touch on the horse racing industry, Cahill, according to the 2021 Power Report, the greyhound industry provides supports and considerable employment, both directly and indirectly, across the economy. It's estimated that in 2019, the industry supported over 4,000 full-time and part-time jobs in the economy. In addition, there are over 6,000 active greyhound owners. The total number of people deriving economic benefit from the sector is estimated at over 10,000. The funding provided to the greyhound sector helps sustain a long-standing tradition, as the industry is very much part of the social fabric of our country, and both rural and traditionally urban. This funding underpins economic activity in what are, in many instances, highly rural areas in particular. The future of the industry is dependent on a strong governance platform and on the industry having the highest standards of integrity and welfare, focused and founded on a strong regulatory system. There's a strong commitment to improved animal welfare in the sector, and that is very clear in the programme for government, that commitment as well. My department is committed to the continued strengthening of welfare standards in the greyhound industry, and future funding of the sector is contingent on welfare standards being upheld, and this is reflected in annual parameters set out by my officials in their liaison with Rassia Con Éireann. Provisions in the Greyhound Racing Act of 2019, which came into effect in May of that year, will make and are making a real difference in this regard. This legislation strengthens the legal basis for the industry with a view to fortifying the integrity of the greyhound racing sector and improving provision for greyhound traceability as well. The new Act improves the governance of Rasia Con Éireann and strengthens the regulatory controls in the industry. It modernises the sanctions and improves integrity within the sector. It provides the industry with real tools with which it can effect fundamental change and reform. A key element of the new legislation is the provision for the first time for a full IT traceability system for racing greyhounds. The Rasia Con Éireann Traceability System, or RESETS or CETS, came into operation on the 11th of January this year. The system provides a mechanism to ensure that racing greyhounds are properly registered and traceable throughout their lives. The sections of the Act commenced on the 1st of October 2020, signal a new era for greyhound racing. They facilitate the board in focusing on its priority objective for achieving the highest standards of care and welfare of greyhounds. Further commencement orders to commence the majority of the outstanding sections are currently being drafted. The Greyhound Racing Act of 2019, when fully implemented, will enable Rasia Con Éireann to ensure the important heritage associated with greyhound racing in Ireland can continue under the appropriate rules and regulations. The greyhound industry is predominantly a rural industry with a strong urban support base, as I said. The COVID-19 crisis, though, has had, similar to other sectors of the economy, resulted in a collapse of commercial activity in greyhound racing and a significant reduction of activity generally as well, which we will all be aware of. Recovery of the industry will require ongoing support to aid restoration of normal levels of activity over the time ahead. In conclusion, Cahill, given the wide geographic distribution of these two industries, they are fundamental to the achievement of a more balanced regional economic growth. Nurturing rural economies is a key priority, as you know, of the government. And in this context, these industries should be given recognition for the considerable contribution that they make to rural activity and to rural employment. The welfare of horses and of greyhounds is a cornerstone of both industries, and I am assured that HRI and RCE are striving in every way possible to ensure the highest standards for the sport and its participants, on and indeed away from the racecourse. The Horse and Greyhound Fund has played a very significant role in providing for this investment and has been instrumental in shaping the destiny of both industries. Brexit does pose an array of threats to the Irish economy, and coupled with the fact that we are a small and open economy, naturally prone to volatility, it can be somewhat difficult to fully predict what the future holds for both industries coming through that. But it is therefore crucial that we support both important industries and their continued navigation through the challenges of COVID-19 and Brexit as we go into the year ahead. Accordingly, Cahill, I am seeking your support to ensure that Horse Racing Ireland and Rasia Con Éireann receive the funding provided for in Budget 2020, and that the very important role played by these industries and the economic activity generated by them are sustained into the future. I commend the regulation to the committee, and I look forward to discussing the matters arising from members as well. So, Cormila Mago Cahill.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'll put you on the clock the next time. Senator Daly.
Thanks, Chair. I want to welcome the Minister and the officials here this evening. And I suppose, as always, when we're dealing with racing, and just put on the record, as is probably well known at this stage, I am Chairman of Cavan Race Committee, and as someone with one brood mare and its progeny, I suppose you could call me a breeder also, but very small time, but put that on the record. I want to welcome the Minister here this evening and pledge my support, and indeed the support, I think, of my party for the increase in the cumulative upper limit. And you've stated all the figures, I'm not going to rehash them, of the jobs that are created and maintained and supported through this fund in rural Ireland. And I suppose one of the big mistakes that are made by a lot of people when they look at this funding, they categorise horse racing and greyhound racing as sport, which they are indeed. You know, the 5 minutes that a horse is racing, or well, he'll be very slow at 5, I suppose the 3 to 5 minutes that a horse is racing is sport. But it's the journey from breeding through rearing, training and transportation to get that horse to the racetrack, to the start line of the race. It creates and supports so many jobs, and jobs in rural Ireland where there aren't other massive employers there to provide the jobs. So you have to speculate to accumulate, and I think the return, based on the figures you've given, Minister, the return that the state gets for the money it invests, it's a very worthwhile investment in that regard. Just a couple of questions or observations. You did mention, I have here our report that the committee here put together, and I welcome the fact that you've acknowledged that report and acknowledged receipt of it, and I will be holding you up on your commitment to follow through on it. It's a report, I think, that cannot afford to end up on the proverbial shelf. It may not be the silver bullet, or may not have all the answers, but you know, where we started out with the report was probably based on accusations and reports that were in national media outlets, and we therefore took on the doing of the report and said, well, all the answers may not be in there. I did state during one of the meetings, when points are made or accusations are made in the media, let it be the standard media or indeed nowadays social media, a lot of people take that as verbatim, and by virtue of some of the statements that were made, there has been reputational damage done to the industry. And where the cliche is you're innocent until proven guilty, I said at one of the committee meetings, and I still believe it, once these statements are made or once the accusations are made, you're actually, in the eyes of the public, then guilty until you prove your own innocence. And I think it's vitally important you, Minister, and your officials, through that report and whatever supplementary or complementary issues you need to bring in, help to take away that, undo the reputational damage that has been done, and keep the good name of Irish racing to the fore, as it is, as you have so mentioned. And I welcome also your commitment to animal welfare, and I think it's important that both HRI, along with the department and RCE, remain committed to animal welfare at every juncture of the horse and greyhound's life. Again, there was serious reputational damage done to the horse racing sector this year through a panorama programme, and the likes of that cannot be seen on our screens. And I think it's incumbent on the administrating bodies and the department to continue the funding for animal welfare and ensure that it's central and integral part of all activities. A couple of questions, and just one. I know Senator Murphy is here, and one thing I was going to raise, along with Senator Murphy and a number of others, and I know yourself, Minister, you've seen correspondence from Midland Horse and Pony Racing, and it's a small amount of money they need, but I think it's vitally important that they get it from some source to keep the show on the road. We all sing the plaudits of our top jockeys when let them be in Cheltenham or Ascot or wherever, but the majority, if not all of those jockeys, start out in the incubation that is the pony clubs and pony racing, and wouldn't make it to the lofty heights to do if it wasn't for pony racing. So I know there's a shortfall there, and Senator Murphy will probably also mention it. I think if it was possible at all within the fund through HRI or whoever, that they would receive some funding. It's a very small amount to looking for, and they need for to cover their insurance. It's usually money, I think, to make through fundraising, but through the pandemic it hasn't been possible for them to do so. Finally, Minister, I just have one question. A number of people in the racing world have been asking me, and unfortunately it's on the back of the raid that is well documented in Monasterevin a couple of weeks ago. And when we had IHRB in front of us, they went on, or I won't say went on, that would be incorrect. They were explaining to us that a big part of how they were going to get on top of the perceived or reported drug issues was the fact that they had been granted the status of authorised officers, which meant they could enter premises, both licensed and unlicensed, racing horses in training or out of training. Yet the reports from the hall a couple of weeks ago was very definitive in saying that the department carried out that raid, and when the department and the Gardaí had sealed off the premises, it was only then that IHRB got called to site. And I just wonder, and I say a lot of people have come to me and asked me as to why, what was the reason there for that, or the reasoning behind it, if, as was put on the record here at our committee hearings, that the IHRB now are recognised by the department as authorised officers. Thanks, Chair.
Minister.
Thanks, Senator Daly. So, first of all, listen to deal with and to recognise, as I did in my opening comments, the work of the committee in terms of putting together the report, which you've submitted to me in the last week or two, and which was really important work, and I know that you give very significant time and attention to. I think it's a real example of how this committee, and it has been a very effective one, but can operate really effectively by engaging with stakeholders and doing reports on particular issues. And certainly the committee was very responsive in relation to addressing this issue. And as I say, in relation to some 11 particular recommendations you've made, I am and my officials are considering it, and I will be considering it in strong detail, and the arguments you put forward in relation to it in terms of how to proceed and respond. In relation to the question on horse and pony racing, Deputy or Senator Daly, so it is a matter that comes under the remit of Horse Racing Ireland. Obviously, Horse Racing Ireland are funded, as is the Greyhound Board, or Rasia Con Éireann, through the Horse and Greyhound Fund. I know that the HRA and the IHRB as well met with representatives of the horse and pony racing earlier in the year, and following on then from those meetings, the HRA agreed to provide funding to assist with the costs associated with running pony race meetings in 2021. And the funding would go directly towards assistance with essential insurance cover, and was provided on a one-off basis. The HRI do invest each year in supporting the working or young jockeys through the EQUIP programme, and a number of fully funded courses are available to young jockeys at the Race Training Centre in Kildare. So listen, it is obviously as a government, as a minister, I do provide the funding to HRI. And they do engage then with their representative members and various aspects of the industry to spend that as prudently and as effectively as possible. And I know, in particular, and the importance of the horse and pony racing sector in particular. And I know, and they have been meeting and engaging, and certainly would look forward to continuing to do that. And I very much take on board the points that you've made, Senator Daly, and I know it's something that Senator Murphy has been raised with me in a number of occasions outside of this committee room as well. In relation to the final point you made on the work of the Special Investigations Unit and the particular investigation that was led by the department on the 9th of November. Listen, as you'll fully understand, obviously, given the fact that it's an active investigation, I'm constrained in terms of being able to comment on it in any detail, as it is still ongoing. But suffice to say that it is normal practice from the point of view whenever there's an SI, a Special Investigations Unit investigation, that they would engage with other appropriate authorities, with the AHRB and the Gardaí, to support them in that. But of course there is a role, and you rightly pointed out, in relation to the AHRB, the capacity they do have now to be able to carry out monitoring and testing in yards directly, and that's something that is open to them at any stage to be able to do as part of their normal business. This one in particular obviously was a Special Investigations Unit-led operation, in which they then engaged as appropriate and as would be standard practice the IHRB, as indeed the Gardaí as well. Thanks, Senator Daly.
Browne.
And I'd also like to welcome back the Minister here and appreciate that he has looked at the report, but it would be totally remiss of me not to refer to the report that this committee published. Like, the committee raised a number of issues and recommendations in relation to the issues that came to the fore, Minister, and those recommendations include the need for transparency in its governance, as well as independence and gender balance on the board. Has anything been done in that regard? The report also recommends that as the IRHB receives public funding to provide its regulatory role, that consideration be given to reclassify the IHRB as a semi-state body under the aegis of the department. Could you update us on that? And given that public monies are directed through the HRI for the functioning of the IHRB, what are your views on this recommendation, and if you're amenable to this, and when would we start to see some change there? The public contribution to the sector of the 70.4 million for next year is considerable, and while those monies are important for the progression of the sector, the correct spending of public funds is crucial for public confidence in this sector. Could you outline what changes the public can expect to happen within the sector in return for funding that we discuss each year? On welfare then, if we can talk about the welfare in both sectors, because coming from a constituency like the Cahill, which is steeped in horse and greyhound racing, I can say welfare is taken very seriously down our way in the industry, and they want to maintain a high standards that they keep already, because when you look at the figures of there's 15,200 jobs indirectly through the horse industry and another 4,000 through the greyhound industry. It's a massive employment down our way. But that doesn't take away from the organisations to whom the money we're discussing will go to. Will you, Minister, outline what specific engagements your department has had with both sectors ahead of deciding upon the level of funding to be issued for next year? And has your department audited all the welfare commitments given by the organisations and the level to which they have lived up to those commitments? On the greyhound issue, then just two small things. Recently it was reported that further funding will be needed to continue the rollout of the traceability system. How much more money are we talking about there? And can you, Minister, tell us the extent to which the system has been rolled out to date, and if his department has maintained contact with the traceability system on the matter, and tell us what has been learned? And is the timeout for the rollout of this system, is it on schedule?
Thanks. Thank you very much, Deputy Browne. So, listen, as I mentioned, in relation to the report of the committee, I think it's in the last week to 10 days as such that, or week to 2 weeks, that the report has been received, and obviously it's something that a lot of work and effort was put into by the committee. So I am considering the recommendations that you've made, and will be considering each of the points you've made as well, and before responding, and obviously I'll take the required time to give that full assessment before actually coming back and reverting and giving clarity in relation to how I intend to proceed. In relation, I know you made points there, in particular in relation to the makeup of the board of the HRB, which is obviously one of those points as well, which I will certainly be reflecting on the points that are made by the committee in that report. In relation to the greyhound spend on welfare, Deputy Browne, so the department ring-fenced 10% of the fund allocation to Rasa Conairn in 2021 for welfare initiatives, and similar criteria is being implemented for 2022. And a major expansion of the overall care and welfare programme in RCE is ongoing and has been progressing. The projected spend from by Rasa Conairn for this year on welfare matters, including integrity, is €1.97 million. There is ongoing bilateral engagement between RCE and my own department in relation to the achievement of these objectives. Obviously, and as I say, funding has and is contingent on ensuring that progress is made and that there's very significant prioritisation of it, and it is something that RCE have very significantly invested in from a point of view of finance and resources and time to ensure that there's very significant oversight and progress being made. Do we have a note there on the traceability? Yeah, thanks, Caroline. In relation to the traceability aspect of things, the resets came into operation in January of this year, and under that then owners and trainers were brought into the system on a phased basis. and data from the system at the end of October indicated the total greyhounds subject to traceability were 20,784. And as you know, the key objective behind it is to ensure that important life events in the life of a greyhound racing animal and dog, including birth, microchipping, registration, the dog's racing career, changes in the case of ownership or in the case of trainer, the location of the dog at any one time, as well as the retirement and end of life, are accurately recorded as part of that. So listen, I think it's a really important step forward. It's something that RCE have put and will be significantly investing in from a resource point of view over the next, continuing on from it, starting off this year. So that's the update with regard to it, Deputy Browne.
Yeah, just on that, Minister, have you any idea how much extra funding is being looked for that?
Well, overall, it's 10% of all of their state funding at a minimum, and I believe that there has been more, that they are spending more than that as things stand. So if you look at it across the board, the projected spend of RCE for this year on traceability in particular was €336,000, and then the care and welfare programmes was $750,000. Veterinary care tracks was over 300,000. The National Greyhound Laboratory was €400,000, and welfare inspections was €175,000. So that's that totals to over and above the 10% requirement that we have, that RCE are required under the funding and that I as Minister have set, and the Department has set as a requirement of funding.
And just coming back to, I appreciate you've only the report for the last couple of weeks, but in regards to welfare, that's been known for months and promises were made months ago. Have you had any specific engagements with the sectors to see what they have done ahead of getting any funding, or has the department been in contact with them? Because I would be saying if they haven't improved welfare, I would be stalling, would be my opinion, if they haven't, because the whole thing that blew up earlier in the year, as Deputy Daly said, has affected both sectors. And if there's not going to be accountability, or if there hasn't been improvements in welfare in that length of time, I don't think it's fair that they're starting to get money on it.
No, and listen, the funding is absolutely continued or contingent on the highest of welfare standards and of a prioritisation of welfare as part of the funding. Obviously, there's ongoing engagement between our team, Kevin Smyth here is the Assistant Secretary responsible, and Caroline Ball, on an ongoing basis in relation to the oversight of that. I might ask Kevin just to give a flavour of that engagement as to how it works over the course of the year. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, with regard to oversight, this quarterly liaison meetings and welfare is a permanent part of the agenda. So it's always discussed at the meetings between, whether it's HRI or RCE, welfare is always discussed. The other thing there, the shareholders' letter of expectation sets out the requirements with regard to welfare. The Minister writes exactly what's required. We set out the requirements in terms of the minimum 10% for greyhounds, and also that that all the commitments are met, and that we have the metrics in terms of rehoming of greyhounds and things like that. So we're seeing both the financial spend and also the statistics in terms of what's been done with regard to animals.
Yeah, Kevin, look, I appreciate that welfare is on the agenda, and I'd imagine it was on the agenda before the television programmes exposed it all. But what I'm asking is, has there been improvements on both sectors since them television programmes? And is funding contingent on improvements being made in them sectors, that confidence can be brought back into both greyhound racing and horse racing? Like I said, myself and the Cahill are from a big area where there's horse racing and greyhound racing, but the general public looking at money being spent in these two sectors, they want accountability and they want to make sure that things have improved. I've no doubt you were talking to them and I'm still talking to them, but the general public want to know that if their money is being spent like this, that there is accountability and things have improved since, what, 6-7 months ago.
I I think, well, the programme now is I think it's 2 years since the programme, and things have changed immeasurably since then. A number of things have been brought in. And the key here is the traceability. It's the ability to be able to recognise what happens through the life cycle of a dog or horse to ensure that they are looked after. And we now have metrics. And one of the things you say on the greyhounds, they've put $500,000 into the cost of the IT system. They have ongoing costs in terms of monitoring what's going on. And we're about to see the first year's results. That means that the dogs are in the system and we're capable of following them. That's a big change since the welfare programme went out on RTE.
Senator Boyhan.
Firstly, I want to welcome the Minister and his officials here to the committee. You're always welcome, and it's great to see the Minister here himself. And I know he's fiercely committed to the committee and engaging with the committee, and that's something we in the committee really appreciate. I suppose really just to go through a few items here in the order that you have set out in your statement that you submitted, Minister. And I'm going to focus really on the HRI allocation of 70.4 million rather than the dogs for the 20% later. But just to focus in on HRI, and I think that's a very substantial amount of money. And you and I and all of us in this committee know that horse racing and horse breeding are an integral part of agriculture, rural life, rural employment, rural communities, rural economy, and that's massively connected to both directly and indirectly to the rural employment. So I'm with you all the way. I see the significance and the importance of this industry, and that's an important one. I think before I go any further, I spoke last year because I pulled up some notes today about my contribution here last year with you, and I raised the issue that we might not have any more reports about this industry or the racing or the dog industry, but that we'd actually dust down the Indicon report, and I had a look at that today again as well. And we had the Indicon Economic Consultants report, and we had the Deloitte report. So we have reports fallen down off the shelves in relation to both sectors. There are still a sizable amount of key recommendations that really I'm not convinced have been fully implemented. And I think we should look at that again. I think it's a healthy exercise to go back and look at reports that we have sitting on our desks and sitting on our shelves up in the department, because I think there's stuff there that we should be following up on. And certainly it is my intention to bring this up at a future meeting of the committee, and I'm going to dust down some of these and maybe focus in on some of those key recommendations, because I think they're important. And I suppose the other thing, Minister, that I really liked about your report is that this heavy emphasis that you've said about integrity and confidence within the sector in both sides, and that is a big issue, and it's a reoccurring theme. Only 2 senators have spoken about it yet, and they've said it, and you've said it in your report, and I welcome that focus, I welcome that emphasis by you in your statement here tonight in relation to the importance of it. But I think that integrity, governance, accountability, they all have to be, animal welfare, they all have to be conditional, and there has to be a certain amount of conditionality, a measured conditionality in relation to this very substantial funding. 70.4 million for the horsing industry, and then 17.6 million for greyhound racing industry. So they're critical. That's a lot of money, and it's very interesting to observe there are a very substantial amount of members in the Oireachtas that are hugely focused in this particular Oireachtas in relation to animal welfare. It's a reoccurring theme in the Dáil, it's a reoccurring theme in the Shannon, and it's one I welcome. And there's a renewed interest in animal welfare now. And I think it is, we need to reassure the public. We had the famous Panorama programme. We've had other investigations in relation to animal welfare. And it is of concern to the Irish people. And it is something they expect the establishment and the authorities to pursue. You referred earlier on in relation to our report, and I'm delighted that you're going to take a look at our report into the racing industry. But I'd like to think that you'll do more. I'd like to think that you'd run it by your chief veterinary officer and your key personnel in your department, and that you would add to it. It's the beginning. And I want to acknowledge the chair and his work in guiding us through that and really, really focusing in on it. We spent a lot of time on that. And one of the good things about this committee, we work in partnership with one another, and we really focus. We believed it was important. This is a particularly important industry that we want to see protected, and we want to see it grow, and we want to see it expand, and we want to see it do well. So I would like, Minister, if you could come back at some time with a timeline. And I respect you have a busy schedule and you have a lot of priorities, but you talked about considering it. I'd like you if you could consider it certainly in the next quarter, if you can, given all your demands, and look at, you know, how much of this we can implement, how much of this can we proceed with, because I think it's important. In the very week that we launched our report, there was a lot of negative comment in the media, and of course we subsequently had the Monasterevin case, and I don't propose to talk about it other than to say, and you were right, it's an issue for revenue, it's an issue for the investigating personnel, it's an issue for the Garda Síochána, but it again raised very serious concerns. The paper doesn't always refuse ink, and we don't know how much that's true, how much the story that's reported public is true or false. But it needs, the investigation will take its course. And when the investigation takes its course, it's important it's put into the public domain. And we know what happened. And we know what sanctions happened. Because I think clearly it has raised more questions than answers and is of concern. So it is something that we need to look at. So I think that's important. In relation to the EU Brexit, we had, and I discussed this with you last year, we had the tripartite agreement between Ireland, the UK and France. And at that stage we were talking about the challenges around Brexit and the movement of bloodstock industry across those jurisdictions and across mainland Europe. I think here again you flag, I don't think, I know, you flagged some concerns there, and we're not out of the woods yet in relation to that. And you might just touch on that, where all that is going. But look, I welcome you're bringing the proposals. I welcome your comprehensive report here today. But I do think the issues, and I go back on, and my asks of you now are simple. One, that you would sort of expedite your consideration of our report, that you would seek advice from the officials in your department and others that you think appropriate, and let's come back with a strong recommendations of how we're going to implement the key recommendations of your key recommendations combined with our key recommendations if you find them acceptable. I'd ask you that you would dust down the Indicon and the Deloitte reports, have a look at them, see is there issues that are outstanding that need to be followed up, because I think that's really important. And finally, I would ask that you have a greater emphasis on the conditionality of animal welfare in relation to both sectors, and that this is a condition of the funding. So how do we measure that? And how do you come back and say, you know, to us, and I note you have a very extensive animal welfare policy document that you published and are committed to. So I think we need a mechanism, a metrics, or some way of monitoring that and reassuring the public, but also this committee, whose remit is animal welfare and agriculture, because we want to see both of these industries prosper, but we want to see them prosper within a tight regulatory framework that is appropriate and fair, and it takes into account, one, that it's open, transparent and professional. And I'll leave it at that. And finally, just in relation to the national study, you mightn't have time now, but I'd be interested in the state's sort of financial commitments to the national studies. I know a wonderful organisation, and the role and the funding mechanisms around that. I know that's not specifically on our agenda today, but at some time you might follow that up at the committee. And again, I want to thank you, Minister, and I want to thank your officials for your time here this evening.
Minister.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Senator Boyhan. So, listen, I know overall you were outlining the importance of the funding through the Horse and Greyhound Fund to the horse racing sector, and I acknowledge and would agree with you in relation to that and how important it actually is. You also outlined the importance of ensuring that welfare is at the core of racing, and I think that is absolutely the case. And it is crucial it is the case the public expected, and it has to be uniform and consistent and across the board. We do, you know, and particularly in the current environment, in the current world, an exceptional instance, an exceptional case can become perceived to be somewhere closer to a norm. So it is not tolerable that there's any situation where welfare standards are not upheld, and it's something we take very, very seriously in the department. And I know that horse owners and indeed dog owners take very seriously as well. And it's crucial that it does, and it's what we all owe to the animals who are in our care and who bring such enjoyment to their owners and indeed to the public as well. In relation to Brexit, obviously there's been challenges over the course of the year, but we have worked very closely with horse owners to navigate those and ensure that both trade and travel have been able to continue. It's essential, obviously, for racing. It's an international industry. Racing is international, breeding is international, and certainly it has been more challenging. Ireland to UK and also Ireland to Europe, where the land bridge is concerned, and it brought challenges, particularly at the start of the year. But it's something we did work closely with the industry on to work to navigate and to be able to manage those new requirements that are now in place. As I say, in relation to the key recommendations of the Oireachtas Committee report, that is something I will be considering and am considering in very strong detail, and will engage with you further on. In relation to it, and certainly in relation to the Indicon and Deloitte reports, also assessing those and ensuring that the advice and learnings are followed through on, and do advise us and guide us as well in relation where appropriate. So thank you, Senator Boyhan.
Deputy Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman, and again, Minister, welcome back to the meeting. First of all, from the outset, I want to put it on the record that I hugely support the Horse and Greyhound Fund and the finances that go towards it. And just a number of questions, Minister. Just first of all, on the IGB and the greyhound industry. You'll probably be aware that a number of years ago you had the Indicon report, and there was a proposed closure of a number of greyhound tracks. Some of them did close, and some of them were able to negotiate and work their way out of it, including my own track in Carthy, who was doing very well now. Minister, are you aware of any proposals to close any further tracks, greyhound tracks in the future? And are you aware of IGB going to carry out any further reports with proposed track closures? And what departmental oversight does your department have on the closure of tracks? Because I know, and I use my own track in Enniscorthy, not my own, but the Enniscorthy track as an example. It was proposed for closure after working with IGB and with the then CEO. I have to say, huge credit to all involved, and the Enniscorthy track is absolutely doing extremely well. So, Minister, maybe you could answer that for me first.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Kehoe. And obviously, I know how important tracks are to each area, and very, very fondly regarded, and a key part of the personality and character of the areas in which they're involved as well. Obviously, overall, it is a matter for Rassia Conairn to consider and to manage. The department did conduct and ask New Era as well to produce a report regarding RCE's financial situation and regarding the health of the industry and the future of the industry as well. And there has been ongoing engagement between the department and RCE in relation to the outcome of that, to help inform the future business development and potential of the racing industry. But in terms of tracks and management of tracks and investment of tracks, first and foremost, is a matter for Rassia Conairn to assess and advise and take forward.
Okay, Minister, and I would ask, Minister, that on any future track closures that your department would have more of an oversight on it, and the proposals that are going forward, because I often think it's not in the best interest of the greyhound industry, and some tracks have been closed, and they're being closed for the wrong reasons. I know there's private tracks and public tracks, and I see millions of euros being invested into some tracks where they don't have huge attendances. I see tracks where they have very small attendances, and they're being financially supplemented by IGB. I think it is a mistake. Where some tracks are making money and they do not get the same financial supports as some of these tracks that are in absolute financial ruin. Just I welcome your comments on the report that this committee carried out, and I want to compliment the chairman on his work and leadership on the report of the horse racing industry. And I would plead with you, Minister, that you would look at the key recommendations in that. I think it's 11 altogether. And I think that the committee were very careful in putting the recommendations together, that they were putting recommendations together that were workable and achievable. And if you compare the horse racing industry to the IGB, we've all seen where the IGB has and they've done a huge amount of recovery work over the last year, where they had to recover from. I don't want to see the horse racing industry going down the same route. It is a very proud industry here in Ireland, and I know some of the other members have spoken about the public commentary, let it be true or untrue, and I know the committee didn't find any evidence of any wrongdoing. But as we delved into the workings of the HRI and the IHRB and everything like that, I really believe that there is transparency needed, required, and it is up to you as Minister to look at the key recommendations, to implement the recommendations along with your officials. And I hope that this report doesn't gather dust on any shelf like many other reports that it receives the respect that it duly deserves because of the work that has gone into it. And maybe if you just could comment on some of the key recommendations. And just one of the recommendations was the CCTV. And Minister, I'd ask you if there is any financial shortcomings on the CCTV being put in place. Like this should have been done years ago, and I understand that both the IHRB have given a commitment that it will be finished soon. But if there is any financial shortcomings, can you, Minister, look at this? I'm not going to ask you to give a commitment because they are receiving millions of euros already. But I think for the good of the industry, the CCTV in tracks and around tracks is needed and required urgently. The other thing I want to touch on is insurance, and that's insurance for some of the activities within the greyhound tracks, which they are finding extremely difficult because their attendances have been down right across all tracks over the last while. And the other issue that's coming down the track, pardon the pun, is in all issues relating to horse, let it be horse racing, point to points, pony clubs, hunting, everything like that. Insurance is absolutely crippling, and often are unable to get insurance from many companies. Has your department done any work on this? Have you heard that this is an issue? And what actions, if any, you or your department are proposing or are taking? Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Deputy Kehoe. Just before you answer, Minister, I just wanted to reinforce Deputy Kehoe's point there on insurance. We've had a number of point-to-point meetings cancelled in the last couple of weeks because of insurance, and it's the point-to-point sector is the cornerstone of our national hunt industry and the nursery for producing those champions that we all like to see in the various venues, whether it's Cheltenham, Aintree, Leopardstown or Punchestown or wherever. So there is a serious issue there, and there was one insurance company providing insurance cover, Liberty, and they have now pulled out of the market. And you know, this is a huge issue. Hunting is also facing problems, and I suppose it's not just in equestrian. All outdoor activities, we see headlines there where ice rings can't get insurance. Water activities are the same. Water parks closed during the summer again as a problem with insurance. So I brought this up on a topical the week before last. Deputy Minister Fleming answered my questions in the Dáil, but we need a resolution for it, Minister, and I'd like to know. I'd like to support Deputy Kehoe, and where can these activity sports go to ensure that they can get insurance cover?
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Kehoe and Cahill. So first, your first point you made, Deputy Kehoe, was in relation to the importance of integrity and the highest of standards in relation to oversight and within the racing industry. And I think we'll all agree that's absolutely critical. The maintenance of the highest of standards is essential to the future of the industry and the sector. And I know from the report that you did yourselves, you found certainly that the testing regime and the systems in place here domestically are very strong and compare with any comparable international systems and other major racing countries as well. A lot of that oversight work is carried out by the Horse Racing Regulatory Board, as you know, and it was funded, received €10.3 million funding through HRI this year to carry out those regulatory functions. In terms of the work that it carries out, an extensive testing programme, we've seen 5,000 samples in 2021, and again including every race winner being tested, and additional race day samples as well, and out of competition samples too, and also including testing at point-to-points. And then, as you know, and as we mentioned previously, I granted authorisation to authorised officers from the IRHB, 12 of them, 12 officials, in May of this year, which strengthened the work on anti-doping in Ireland. And those officers, that officer status allows those IHRB officers access to sample any thoroughbred at any time across the country. It also gives the veterinary team and IHRB increased powers, which include access to unlicensed premises as well, and the testing of these operate in the same manner as they do for licensed premises, and can take place without any prior notice. And the tests involve blood, urine, and indeed hair samples as well. Listen, that's absolutely critical that we have and properly fund and invest to ensure that the highest of standards are maintained. And it's essential that everyone in the industry maintains the various highest of standards. We are very fortunate to have a really strong industry in this country, one that's been built up over many years through great work on behalf of all stakeholders, and maintaining its future good and the top-class standards and integrity is essential to it having as successful a future as it has had over the years. And that's why we put such more effort and so much emphasis on it. That's why we will be funding it so strongly. And I know that's why those in the industry are also really aware of that uniform, consistent, highest standards right across the board. In relation to CCTV, the funding was provided of €500,000 from the HRI to the IHRB as part of its integrity services funding this year for the installation of CCTV in all racecourse stable yards. The tender process for the project has been completed, and the contract is to issue shortly, subject to board approval. Most racecourses will have a CCTV system installed before their first meeting in 2022. And all 25 racecourses will be completed by the end of Q1 2022. In relation to insurance, Deputy Kehoe and the Cahill also mentioned this as well as a real issue, and I know it has been a real difficulty for a number of point-to-points this year. I know that HRI are working with relevant stakeholders to assess potential solutions. I know it's something also in general in relation to competitiveness in the insurance sector. The Minister of State, Sean Fleming, has done very significant work in his department to address as well, but particularly in relation to the challenge we see here, HRI, I know, are engaging with stakeholders in relation to the challenges there and to look at potential solutions as well. Thanks, Deputy Kehoe.
Okay. Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Thanks, Chair, and I want to welcome the Minister and his officials in. Minister, I think that on the report that we done, that's the first thing I'll go to. The most successful system probably ever brought in this country was by the Department of Agriculture, the AIM system, and I think there's low-hanging fruit in the report that we done that could be moved pretty rapidly, that would give confidence in the whole sector in relation to the traceability. And I would ask you, first of all, to look favourably on that. I know you'll be looking at the whole report. I don't expect you to give to say that you're going to do X, Y, or Z today, but I would ask you to look favourably on that. In relation to insurance, and I want to concur with the last two speakers who have spoke in relation to pony racing, or indeed point to points, or what are the different types. There is a major problem in insurance, and we are facing a situation where, because of people leaving the market, I know it's a private market, but we are leaving ourselves, and it's probably spreading wider than just that, that we are under ferocious pressure. And I would ask your department to even liaise with, I think it's Sean Fleming or the Department of Finance, in trying to bring a solution to that. In relation, and maybe it's a bit, I don't know, is it inside or outside it, the equine farming cap from the DAFM, or with DAFM, in relation to horse breeders and that, under TAMS and that, do you envisage that you will be able to broaden out some of the supports in TAMS? Or I think they were actually included in the TAMS, but they were never kicked into gear, is the big problem. And in the line of animal welfare, I think every deputy here supports as much animal welfare as possible, because, you know, it's side of it, and I think
We're losing you there, Deputy Fitzmaurice. What's going on there, gentlemen? Huh? I'll go to Deputy Carthy and I'll come back to Deputy Fitzmaurice. Deputy Carthy.
Thank you, Chair, and to thank the Minister for being here. Like a Dublin bus, 2 visits from the Minister in succession. So thank you for that. The proposal before us is for an increase.
Sorry, Matt, Deputy Carthy, Mike is back online. Let you back in again after that, okay? Deputy Fitzmaurice.
Sorry about that. I don't know, something went wrong here. I'm in Leinster House, but the whole thing went wrong. No, those are my questions, Minister. I'm not going to. I met can go in straight after it. Okay.
Okay, Minister.
Yeah, listen, thanks, Deputy Fitzmaurice, for the question. So, listen, I know it is one of the submissions that you've made as part of your report in relation to traceability, and certainly something I'll be reflecting on further. I know HRI are working with Weatherby's Ireland and the IHRB to develop a comprehensive thoroughbred database to improve traceability via improved Weatherby's e-passport functionality, and that work is ongoing. But certainly, I will be reflecting on the submissions made by your own committee and the suggestions that you have made in relation to insurance. I think I've dealt with that point, and it is something I've engaged with Minister Fleming on, and as well, and I've spoken to a number in the sector about. And as I say, HRI are engaging with stakeholders on the issue as well to see what explore possible and potential solutions. And listen, in relation to TAMS, it is an issue that's been raised with me over the last period of time, and have asked our TAMS section to reflect on. I will be engaging with them further to assess the merits or otherwise of extending TAMS. I know TAMS isn't available currently for most facilities and types of investment in the equine sector. But as I say, it is something that's been raised with me and that I will be assessing further. Thanks.
Okay. Deputy Carthy, sorry for interrupting you there a minute ago.
No problem. So my first question essentially is, how is the figure arrived at in terms of the funding that's allocated to the Horse and Greyhound Fund? You know, I think we're all on the record in this committee in agreeing that both sectors are incredibly important. The figure that's been brought before us this year is a reduction on last year, but it in itself was a substantial increase on 2020, and the reason cited was the COVID emergency. So the figure we have is still 4 million, an increase on 2020 figures. And I just want to try and get a sense of the Minister as to where that figure and how that figure is decided upon.
Thanks, Deputy Carthy. I'll actually ask the Assistant Secretary, Kevin Smyth, just to go through the process and in terms of the assessments that have been made and the engagements that are in place to work out the requirement and the final level of funding allocation. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Deputy Carthy. The way in which the Horse and Greyhound Fund is determined is based on the budgetary bids that are put in by both organisations. It's considered to be part of the estimates process. So basically they put in big bids and it's dealt with as part of the budgetary process. They ask for the money. Normally they would be looking for increases and things they'd like to do. And then it's finalised with Dept and it's put into the department's vote as part of the budgetary process. You're absolutely correct that there was an increase for this year in the amount of money for the Horse and Greyhound Fund. There was an additional 12 million put in to help protect both sectors against the effects of COVID, because they were both economically affected very badly by the closures caused by the COVID pandemic. The other thing about it is the 4 million in addition this year, some of that money is actually residual COVID money which is being given to the two sectors for 2022, because the economic effects are still being felt. But the way in which in general the Horse and Greyhound Fund is determined is part of the budgetary process. It's done as part of the department's vote and it's agreed with Dept and the Minister for Public Expenditure.
But that essentially is my question. And so obviously both organisations would make claims in terms of what they would like to get. But I assume that there's more depth in terms of the consideration given as to what is actually provided. Would I be correct in saying that it would be rare that both organisations will get exactly what they want?
No, you're absolutely right. What they put in is 2 detailed budgetary submissions for each of them. They actually detail what they require, and then it's sent in usually to both ministers, Minister for Agriculture and the Minister for Public Expenditure, and it's followed up by meetings with both ministers as well, where they outline their budget bids, and then the actual amount of money for the Horse and Greyhound Fund is determined as part of the department's vote in Budget 2022.
Okay, so is it, I suppose, taken into consideration, or how is it that on an annual basis the agreed funding to the Greyhound Board is precisely 20% of the overall funding? It would appear that both the HRI and the Greyhound Board would have different priorities in different years, and is it not an unusual circumstance that the funding is divided in such a precise way, regardless of what the mitigating factors for one sector or another might be?
There's actually a legal basis for the 80-20 split. It's set out in an SI. It's determined, it was, I think, 2016 that the ratio was determined to be 80-20. That's set.
It's set in regulation.
Or was it even further back than that?
Pascal Taggart was chairman of Boylan.
Okay, yeah. No, it's been set for quite some time, the 80-20 split.
But the Minister has, under the Horse and Greyhound Act, the power to, by regulation, vary the percentages that are specified. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
So I suppose back to the Minister, are you satisfied with that the 80-20 should just be considered as a foregone conclusion on an annual basis?
Well, as you say, Deputy Carthy, it's open to the Minister to decide to change that at any time. But I think when you look at the two industries, they can be similar. They can be subject to similar challenges. There's lots of similarities between both, and I think over the course of the last year to 18 months speaks to that as well in relation to, for example, the impact on COVID. Both of them are industries which are very much subject to race attendances, very similar models in that regard. I think by and large, in terms of the engagement I would have had with both organisations, in the two budgets that I have done. The dynamic has been quite similar from both in relation to the challenges that they've had to deal with. So I haven't seen any reason to actually alter that. But you're right that opportunity would be open to the Minister to decide to alter at some stage in the future if we saw fit.
Yeah, it just seems strange to me that you have a system whereby if, for example, the horse racing sector managed to bring forward a really good proposal, that another organisation would get the benefit of that pro rata just as a standard. I would argue that we need to move away from the set percentages and actually allocate funding on the basis of merit. And that's not to say that either our organisation would remain or increase or decrease. A line you've mentioned in your opening statement was that government funding presents an excellent opportunity to yield a high return for investment, leading to a flow of income right through the economy. I think we all agree on that. You know that the question I have is whether we can be sure that that is actually what is happening, that government funding is delivering the highest possible return. Have you had any discussions with HRI with regard to the level of government funding that is actually allocated through prize money? And have you looked at other avenues as to whether or not there are better ways to ensure that that money is distributed across the sector to benefit the widest number of players in the sector, but also the widest number of geographical areas?
Because his wife is in revenue.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Carthy. So I know it's something you raised at the committee last year as well, and made the same point, and indeed in debates in the Oireachtas too. So I think a key driver behind the health and preeminence of the sector nationally is that we're able to compete in terms of racing horses and or horse racing and the competitions that take place in attracting international horses, as well as ensure that right throughout the racing ecosystem that there's very strong and attractive races for all types of horses. So that's an important driver for the industry, that's the rationale for the reason for competitive funding pots for different races. So the government supports a competitive prize money structure then, and that does help the viability of the various businesses, including the extension of the prize money down to fifth place in races which are supported. It's a key driver of the investment in the sector. And the HRI fact book, for example, to give you some detail, in 2020 would have shown that there were over 300 fixtures around the country with 7,500 individual runners, and 25% of those horses would have won at least one race over the course of the year. And there were 5,000 individual runners which would have won prize money at some stage, equating to around 70% of individual runners. Of the 2,500 individual races, over 2,000 of them would have had prize money of under 25,000 euro, with over 50 having prize money of greater than 100,000 euro. There are also obviously further opportunities as well for Irish trained horses to win prize money abroad as part of the equation too. But I think a key part of our industry is having strong races and attractive races, both at elite level and also at different levels within the industry. And as you know, that's a key driver in relation to those who actually get in and become a horse owner and put a horse into training, and indeed for the significant employment that happens throughout many of the training yards across the country. They are very much driven by those horses racing and the prize money that comes from those, justifying the individual business cases and indeed the individual very personal decisions that owners can have, whether on their own or in many cases working with coming together with friends and to actually become involved in the sport, and the prize money is a real driver of that, and it does then permeate down throughout the industry and very much drive and populate the financial system within the industry as well.
Yeah, see, I'm not disputing that the prize money makes an impact. What I'm asking is whether we should be looking at to see whether there are ways in which this level of funding could make a greater impact or a more positive impact, because no matter what way we set out all the figures and all the numbers, and the facts speak for themselves. A huge proportion of the prize money goes to a very small number of players. And I have to say, I was stunned in recent weeks, and this has been raised by other deputies, to learn that even though we have invested as a state 1.5 billion almost euro of funding in the horse racing sector since 2000, that the horse and pony sector actually gets nothing, none of that. It's such a core component of this industry, and it's been mentioned already, and I know you've referred to discussions with the HRI. I'm asking you, as the person who's going to be signing the cheque for whatever it'll work out at 60 odd million euro to horse race in Ireland, will you ensure that a proportion of that money goes to the horse and pony racing section that's so important to the overall industry?
Listen, I think it's really important that we support all sectors, and I know HRI are really aware of that as well, and do have ongoing continuous engagement with all stakeholders and all of those involved at all levels within horse racing, and I think that's really important. That's the case, and it's really important. It's important that all levels are supported, because the next level depends very much on the health of the level underneath it and the foundation levels, and going right back to the small breeders, the small trainers, and the small time owners. As I said in the figures I gave there, so we've just over 50 races nationally that would have a pot of over €100,000, and that's out of 2,500 individual races that would be supported for prize money. But it is really important that we do have those significant races that are really competitive and sought after from the point of view of our national sector, but also that attract internationally. And if it wasn't the case that you had races significantly supported like that and internationally competitive pots, then I think the sector would suffer because of that. And I know it's not a direct example, but like even if you take draws, or even if, I know Deputy Durkin isn't here, but if he was, he would be maybe comparing it to the National Lotto, where that's very much driven by the opportunity to win. And everybody contributes in really small ways by buying a ticket to what is a very large and successful pot with the potential to win that big prize. And maybe we will see through Deputy Durkin's efforts that one or two balls drop from it, and more actually winning. But I think having that competitive racing pots, being able to compete and bring people into the industry, having that hope that everybody strives for in relation to having the winner, in relation to having a horse in their lifetime, or if they're lucky, a couple that might significantly win prizes, and which will drive on and encourage people to invest their own money. Very often, in most cases, it's because it's a hobby and because it's a sport. People aren't making money out of it. They bring their money to it because it's something that's really that they have a great passion for, and in the hope that they will turn over a winner, and that they will get lucky one day with a really good horse or a really good greyhound. So in both industries, I believe competitive races and funding pots are important, and that does really drive the health of the industry overall too. So it is important we keep an eye on that. But you're right, Deputy Carthy, as well. Throughout the system and throughout the ecosystem, it's important that all sectors are supported, and I know that's something that HRI are very aware of as well, and indeed Rassia Conern.
Yes, I think the difficulty, Minister, is if it's a lottery, it's the taxpayer that's paying for all the tickets, and therefore we need to make sure that the taxpayer is getting the best value for money out of all of this. And every time I've raised this with you, I've actually been struck by contacts that have been made with me by people in the industry that have said absolutely there has to be a better way of ensuring that all facets receive supports. And I note that you didn't answer directly whether you would ensure that the horse and pony racing groups would actually be catered for. I would ask you to ensure that you say very clearly to HRI that either they pony up, to use that term, or that you will have to find alternative ways of looking at that into the future. I just want to touch on some of the deliberations that our committee have had, and I won't go through the facets of the report. I've heard what you've said, but it does strike me that the argument for distinguishing and separating the IHRB, which is the regulatory body, away from HRI, which in effect is the governing body, from each other, makes eminent sense in order to ensure that we have maximum public confidence in the animal welfare, anti-doping and other regulations that the IHRB have responsibility over. I just don't think in the modern era that it's feasible to have a situation where a regulatory body is dependent on the governing body for its annual budget. So my question, I have two questions. The first in relation to that point, whether you will pursue that agenda to break them up in order to ensure maximum public confidence. And the second part to that question is, will you now ensure that there is maximum transparency in terms of how all of these organisations that are essentially publicly funded operate, including ensuring that the salaries of the senior executives are actually published and publicly available?
So listen, Deputy, just to take up the point you were making earlier on about the public investment in HRI. As you know, this year it's set at €70.4 million, but the Deloitte report, which was published in 2017, showed that overall the industry was worth to the economy €1.84 billion. And 28,500 jobs. So while there is the national funding commitment from the government, which is a really important driver and generator of the industry, but that's 70.4 million this year, but it is an industry which can be worth up to about €1.8 billion to the wider economy. So it really does. It's a small part of the overall industry, but an important part of it and an important driver for it. Listen, in relation to the recommendations of the committee, which I spoke to earlier, I have received them, and I know it's something that you as a committee have given great thought and consideration to, and something that I very much respect the work you carried out and the attention that you put into and hours you put into doing that. It was an important role, and I am considering all of the recommendations that you put forward and will be reverting to you with my views on them. And I know that was one of the points that you addressed as part of that. And likewise in relation to the transparency within in terms of salaries, where the state has a role and the state is providing funding. That's something I'm assessing as well in relation to the general practice and ensuring that reviewing it in terms of what standard practice is across the public service.
Okay. Senator Boylan.
Margaret, and welcome to the Minister. I'm sorry I missed your opening statement, but I'm reading through it there. So the first question I have is just around the full IT traceability system and whether or not that's going to come from the 10% that's ring-fenced for welfare expenditure, or it's an additional amount of money. And then just to focus particularly around the data that's collected for around greyhound welfare, because I know a lot of people in this committee are passionate about greyhound racing and horse racing. I'm not one of them, but I know that if we want this industry to survive, then it's in the interest of the industry to have the absolute best welfare standards that are available. And in a response to questions that I put into Greyhound Racing Ireland, they've confirmed that there's no vets present at the official trials and unofficial trials. They're present at races, but not at the unofficial and official trials. So just to say, would you consider making that mandatory that they're present, given that, of course, that shortens the amount of time from an injured animal having to seek treatment, but also around the collection of data on injuries? Because from my understanding of the responses I got from Greyhound Racing Ireland is that the injuries fund is for race-ending injuries, and it's only accessible at official trials, not at the unofficial trials. So I don't think we're getting the full picture around the injuries that are being sustained, and they're not collecting the data which they've admitted to at the unofficial trials. So I suppose just to start, just your views on that traceability. Is it coming from the 10% or is it an additional to the 10%? And then just your views on the fact that vets are not present at the trials.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So, listen, I'll pass your views in relation to the veterinary at non-official trials on to Roscommon for
it's at both the unofficial and the official. So at the official trials, there's the name of a vet is given if there's an injury, a local vet that they can contact, and then any race-ending injuries, my understanding is they can access the injury fund. Unofficial trials, which is the younger dogs, don't even have the name of a vet present, and they also can't access the injury fund if there's a race-ending injury at an unofficial trial.
Yeah, so listen, I'll pass it on to Roscommon for the review. Obviously, you have a system in terms of, you know, whether it be sports in our own that we participate in ourselves, local matches or county matches, whatever. Some places we'd have doctors present, more local matches we wouldn't. It doesn't mean that medical care isn't sought if somebody has an injury. And likewise, you know, it's at higher where you have a similar system in relation to races.
They do have it in Britain, though.
Okay. No, well, I'll pass your views and consideration on to them for their view and consideration. But as I say, whenever you transpose it to things that we would participate in ourselves, you can have different attitudes at doctors. For example, if you're a county player in GAA, you'll have a doctor at training as well as at matches, whereas
I suppose we have a choice to play the sport.
we do. And listen, horses and greyhounds are bred to run as well, and they don't like hanging around doing nothing. So in relation to the actual the greyhound injury support scheme, it was introduced in 2020 to provide financial assistance to injured greyhounds to continue with a healthy life after their injury, and the applications were assessed competitive action following on from treatment. Initially, the scheme provided for up to €500 per application. However, the scheme has been further increased to €1,000 per application since October of this year. Up to the 31st of October, there were 18 applications received and 12 processed. The scheme was extended at the start of Q3 to include injuries to greyhounds which were incurred during official qualification trials, and plans are further underway to expand the scheme further in 2020.
And is that expansion going to go into the unofficial trials then? Because my concern is just if a dog has a race-ending injury at an unofficial trial, what's happening to the dog then? How can we guarantee that it's getting treatment? So listen, obviously up until the start of 2020, there wasn't any such fund in place. So there's been significant progress in relation to this, and they do have plans afoot to look to expand it. Under the care fund as well, they introduced a range of care and welfare initiatives, including incentivising the rehoming of greyhounds through additional supports through the Irish Retired Greyhound Trust, and also there's financial supports then through rehoming agencies, and the total spend of that was €23,000 last year too. And we see that in 2020 the Greyhound Injury Support Scheme provided financial assistance to 8 injured greyhounds. So I mentioned that already there. So listen, as I say, they do have plans to continue to expand it. I don't know the detail of the full detail as to how they plan to do that, but I think they have made significant progress and they're looking to build on that, Senator Boylan. And then I suppose just to follow up, and I won't take much more time, Chair. Is there plans to gather information on the greyhound breeders with less than 5 bitches and to feed that into the system?
Do you know the answer to that, Caroline, do you? Yeah, we'll check that and revert to you.
Oh, okay, and then just moving on to the horse racing, just a question around the traceability and responsibility of a racehorse is abandoned. So who is responsible if a racehorse is found abandoned that has a microchip? So for example, if the horse is owned by a syndicate but it's being cared for by a keeper and you find an abandoned racehorse, where does the book stop for who is responsible for that horse when it's abandoned?
Kevin, do you want to take that one?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, Senator. My apologies. I'll have to follow it up for you.
Okay. I'll leave it there, Chair. So thanks.
My understanding is that a horse wouldn't be allowed to run without a microchip. All thoroughbreds are microchipped. There's about 19% of the horses not microchipped, but they're non-thoroughbreds. And it's an issue I brought up here at the committee on a good few of occasions. I don't think the department is working hard enough for compliance with microchipping of horses, but they're non-thoroughbred horses.
Prove the ownership or if it's a syndicate.
Well, it is linked to the passport, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the person on the microchip, because we have the same issue with the dog microchips as well. If it's not updated, you can have a dog found that's still registered to the breeder. So can we ensure that if a microchipped racehorse is found abandoned, that who is the person responsible for that racehorse? And if it is the name that's on the microchip, well then that might ensure that people are very keen to ensure that the information is updated.
Valid point. Yeah.
And listen, obviously local authorities do play a role where there's abandoned horses, and in terms of horse welfare at individual local authority level, I think in the vast majority of instances where there's challenges like that, they may not be microchipped, but obviously if they were, there would be the capacity there to identify who would be responsible and who the responsible owner would be.
Deputy Flaherty.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a lot has been gone over, so I'll try not to rehash it. Say at the outset, I'm obviously very proud of our horse racing and greyhound racing industries, but that doesn't mean that we can't challenge them, and particularly in the area of accountability and in animal welfare. Obviously, growing up in rural Ireland, I remember when I was young, there was one horse dealer, and he said once, most horse dealers can say that they have good horses, but it takes a very good horse dealer to admit that he has a bad horse. And obviously, there's an awful lot of bad horses in horse racing as well. And when I say bad, I mean horses that don't just cut the mustard and don't cut the grade. And a broken down 3 or 4 year old gelding is pretty much worthless, and it's where they go afterwards, really, which is where the whole area of accountability and traceability comes into. And I know that the department and officials did tremendous work in this area, particularly after the Horsemeat scandal. But I would have raised this with yourself, Minister, last November, and I would have raised it throughout the committee as well with officials from the department. I'm still concerned, though, about the efficacy of the registration and traceability in the equine sector. It's light years away and behind what we have in terms of bovine registration and traceability. And I would have raised this case, I think it was last November, I would have raised this case in relation to a sports horse breeder from County Longford. And I know it is a different genre, but the similarities are probably relevant to the discussion. He would have flagged with Sport Horse or Horse Sport Ireland last November that when he checked the ownership breeder records, there was still 18 horses on that Sport Horse Ireland register that were still registered to him. 2 of the horses were dead, 2 were exported and subsequently died, 3 were exported, 9 he had sold, but the registrations weren't updated. 1 horse he never actually owned, and then the final horse he had sold and it was subsequently exported, but those records weren't updated. I don't think there's an awful lot of work to be done, but I think it would give great reassurance to the public if we could significantly improve the traceability that we have in the sector. And I'll go back to that broken down 3 or 4 year old gelding, and particularly if it's a thoroughbred, there's not a lot of meat there. So you really do worry where those animals do end up. And obviously, we're conscious of where they do go, and there's a lot of movement in horses, and anecdotally we're told that there are huge cull percentages in terms of the big yards and the big owners in terms of those horses that aren't making the grade. So I suppose, Minister, it's probably a question more so for the officials, but in terms of their own view and in light of probably the information I've shared with that case with Horse Board Ireland, are they satisfied, or do they still see a piece of work to be done in terms of registration and traceability in the equine sector? Thank you.
Charlie.
Chair, could I take that?
Yes, Kevin. Yes.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely correct with regard to the point about the need to improve traceability. The system for horses is not as good as the system for cattle, and I think we all know that, and it has to be addressed. We are doing more work on ID and horse passports, and it's one of the areas we will be addressing with regard to the response to the report of this committee with regard to ID, because it has been highlighted by yourselves as well. So we will be coming back. There is one good development I think I should make you aware of, is the equine census that is taking place this year. It was announced recently, and it will be taking place. So we'll get a more comprehensive overview with regard to it. But we do agree that we need to sharpen the system with regard to equine ID.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Minister, I suppose just reinforce a couple of points that were made by the committee. You know, I know you have addressed the insurance, but I would urge you to use what influence you can to get the insurance issue sorted out. As I said, it's more than just a question. It's all activity, sports, and recreational activities, which you know, of an adventurous nature. And I would urge you to use your influence to seek and we get insurance cover. And the point has been made by numerous senators and deputies about pony racing, and I think I would put harness racing in there as well. Both of them are, you know, are just looking for not a huge amount of funding, and they both have an important role to play in the whole equine sector. And you know, if Horse and Greyhound Fund is there, and obviously needed for those two industries, but I would ask you to pony and harness racing, if a fund could be considered for them. And as I said, the amount of money they're looking for the exchequer isn't of a huge amount. Just, I suppose the other, and while we're talking about equine, the Horse Sport Ireland and, you know, the sport horse, they were disappointed after the budget, Minister, that they didn't get a more of an allocation. It's you know, it's an industry that is 26 county wide as well, and I would ask you, you know, to engage with Horse Sport Ireland for the forthcoming year to see, you know, what funding could be got for them there. They have ambitious projects and they have very ambitious capital projects there that they're looking for help on. So while they don't come in under the Horse and Greyhound Fund, obviously, I would just ask you to consider Horse Sport Ireland and for the sport horse that is, you know, compasses 26 counties. And the other point, and I'm going to put on my constituency hat, Minister, is capital projects and the plans for a second all-weather track in the country. And Tipperary has been the site that HRI have picked out as the most suitable for the all-weather. And again, I would ask if you could use your influence to push on that project and to get, you know, they are looking for significant amount of capital for that infrastructure. You know, they're talking of putting a training academy there as well, and a lot of different infrastructure improvements for the industry as a whole. I think it would be a great project, and Tipperary is a very central location with an excellent rail infrastructure into it as well, for if they're going to have young students coming there to learn their trade. So I would just ask you to take those points on board, Minister, please. Okay, on behalf of the committee, I wish to thank Mr McConalogue and the officials from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine for assisting us in our consideration of the Horse and Greyhound Racing Fund Regulations 2021. In accordance with standing orders, a message will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil and the Clerk of the Shannon stating that this committee has completed its consideration of the motion. I now propose we suspend the meeting just to allow the changeover of department officials. Is that okay? Great. Okay, the meeting is now suspended and we'll just let the officials change over.